welcome to another episode of The Buzzer Race. I'm your host, Nikhil Ranjan.
And I'm your co-host, Alan Zhang.
And for our guest today, we have Kate Hattemer, captain of the 2005 NJCL Advanced Champion team. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So could you kind of give a brief introduction for the listeners, names, state as a JCLer, whatever else you'd like to include, and your favorite book?
Okay. Well, I was a JCLer a long time ago, which was, I graduated from high school 15 years ago. So I played Certamen for Ohio from 2002 to 2005. And I was captain of two NJCL champion teams, intermediate in 2002 and then advanced in 2005. And then after that, I was a classics major at Yale and kept coaching for Ohio throughout college. I played on World Series teams, including the inaugural champions that turned the trophy into a pogo stick, which maybe should have been how you introduced me, because blind recollection is probably what I'm most known for. And then, I taught Latin in Virginia at Flint Hill School for a few years. I moved back to Ohio, came back to Virginia to teach at Flint Hill again, where I did some coaching. So I've been involved in Certamen in a lot of different angles.
Yeah, and your favorite book?
Oh, and my favorite book, I've been agonizing about this ever since you warned me that you were going to ask. Honestly, my favorite book is probably this novel. It's called The Magician's Assistant by Ann Patchett. She's better known for like Bel Canto and Commonwealth, some other novels, but this is I think it was her second or third book. And it's just it's about a magician's assistant in LA who then goes to North Dakota to find the family of the magician. And it's, I don't know, it's just a book that pulls at my heart, even though I feel like other books maybe have had more of an impact on my life or are better, but I love that book.
No, that's super neat. I'll now have to read this book. Usually when I get book recommendations, I just kind of secretly write them down and I'm like, I have to read this at some point.
Oh, nice.
Because, I mean, there's praise to it. So
it's good to have a good list going.
Yeah. No, I my reading list has just been kind of building every time I'm like, oh, what's your favorite book? And it's like, oh, okay, let me just write this down. So yeah, it's quite the list, but I'll get through it eventually. So with that, I think we can kind of just jump right in. And so I was curious, how did you get into Latin?
Well, everyone had to take Latin, and I went to a Catholic school for 5th and 6th grades, and everyone had to take it in 6th grade. And I was lucky enough that this teacher, Hugh Himwich, who he had been teaching at Flint Hill in Virginia, which coincidentally ended up being the school that I taught at. And then he moved to Ohio, and he was kind of like a Johnny Appleseed figure of Certamen, just starting programs that then just seemed to thrive, whether or not he stuck around. So it was actually his last year at the school, but he built this a Latin cult, the way that I'm sure we can all think of the teachers who built that where we come from. And everyone loved Latin. And he was just one of those teachers that the bar was here, but he expected you to be so much higher than that it was really fun and challenging to do it. So it was just a complete elective, mostly about mythology in 6th grade, but my best friend and I got very into it. We started going to Latin club and playing Certamen very badly with 7th and 8th graders, who at the time seemed like the oldest, most mature, best Certamen players we could imagine. But that was where it started. Then I went to Alan's alma mater too, for 7th through 12th grades, where they also required Latin for 3 years, and just kept going with it. The program was not at all developed there, so we had I think we had 4 delegates at our first state convention, but we got to build it there, and it just never really fell out of it after that and got stuck.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you got into Certamen just kind of by joining the Latin club. Did you get into the competitive side around then too? Did that take some time? What was that like?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm extremely competitive. And I think this was, I'd been in a spelling bee and, things like that for me anyways, it wasn't something that I could really pour myself into, but this was the first academic area of my life that I found oh my gosh, I can study for this. I can get better at this. I can win. This is really exciting. So I immediately was drawn to that angle of Certamen and to the thrill of, being in first on the buzzer, getting a question right. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super neat. And I think that is what draws a lot of people in, kind of the rush when you're buzzing, and especially when you get it right. When you miss it, there's a tragedy that goes on for a little bit, but getting it right definitely is a big thrill. So what kept you in Certamen? You started off, visiting the club with your friend, but what kind of kept you in as you went through the years?
Well, it's funny that we just talked about like what started us, because I think for me it was probably like the competitive angle was always very interesting for me, and the challenge of it. But I think it was probably the people then that ended up keeping me in it. So it was really that combination of like, this was a place where I felt at home. This was where all my friends, I could meet people from other schools. But then also, of course, there was this whole other angle of like, and I can spend a lot of time doing this. It's kind of like, I think a lot of, I mean, I don't know. It's like you need to have like somewhere to like funnel all your energy in high school. And some people find that like socially or, in music or something. And this for me was like, I had all this like excess intellectual energy in my case, and I like could put it all into Latin. And it was really like a great, I think that like looking back on high school, that's what I'm most grateful to JCL and Certamen for giving me, was like an arena where that could play out. But then also like, I was kind of a nerd, and then there were all these people that liked nerds and that like, celebrated the nerds, and everyone was a nerd. So it was great to have a place that I felt really at home at, as opposed to, high school, where I think most people probably feel like a bit of an outsider, a bit of a weirdo in some form.
Yeah, I think that that's really relatable. I mean, I too like really liked going to local tournaments and, competing, having an outlet for competitive Latin, which is so weird to everyone else in high school. And I really like that you mentioned that that you made lots of friends from other schools, because I think that was really great about the Cincinnati local scene, that, there were so many schools that were active. So I was wondering if you could describe what the local scene was like in Certamen or in Ohio when you were playing, and like what was your experience like playing in it?
Yeah, it's I mean, really, I don't know if it was so different than at least what it seems like now, from my vantage point, watching my brother compete in Ohio in the past few years, or from what I see in Virginia, where there's several schools that really have these big thriving programs. And then there's many, many more schools that have smaller, more tight knit clubs in some ways, maybe, 10 people but they regularly do things. And there's a lot of camaraderie among students from school to school at tournaments. And I think like this, I see so many students finding their social outlet in it, whether it's like with people at their school and then having this broader network outside their school. So I think that's probably what it was for me. And Alan, I mean, you can probably, I don't think the schools that are really into Latin have changed that much in the past 15 years, but Summit, Indian Hill, Madeira, like the schools with the teachers that could draw the kids and build the programs.
Yeah, for sure. But like, I think even today, you're really well known in the Ohio local scene. And I think like, it's true.
That's ridiculous, but it's funny.
And I think like kind of when you were playing, there was like this whole cohort of really successful Latin students. And I was just wondering like, what were like the connections that you made through the Ohio scene? And like, could you just talk about that?
Yeah. And I think some of this, I mean, I talked about Mr. Himwich before, but he had started this program at Summit that then, I mean, that was Ohio's time of winning national championships from like 1997 to 2005. And there was all these, very strong students who chose to like funnel their energies into Latin. And so, I mean, I like practices in people's basements over the summer, like Saturdays where we didn't really do much Certamen during the school year. Honestly, like we went to tournaments and then we went to state convention, but we didn't really practice much, but we would see our Certamen friends all year. So it was, that kind of environment. But the summers really were where the relationships were built. We had like 4 weeks of Costra at Summit with Mr. Dean, who like, I don't want to give short shrift to him because Mr. Dean kind of started it, but then Mr. Dean carried it on. And then, but then he would go on vacation with his family every year, like for 2 or 3 weeks before nationals. So then it was like the kids took over. So we had like all day practices in people's basements. One kid had like, his parents had bought the house next to them. I think like for him and his brother to live in, it was kind of this weird situation, but we would have like Certamen camp there where we would just like take over this house for like 12 hours all week. And it was great. And it was really like a taste of freedom for like, me, like I'm relatively sheltered. I'm the oldest child. So my parents like didn't know what to do with me. So yeah, it was my first time like hanging out with big kids.
Buying a house for Certamen camp, that's definitely something I've never heard before. But I mean, the general story actually brought back a lot of memories for me because, I remember going to Mr. Dean's Costra. I remember going to, 8-hour basement practices. Yeah, those are really fun times.
Yeah, those are some of my like best memories of high school. It was so fun to feel like so intensely involved in something. I imagine that's how people feel like when they have like the football boot camps that are like 3 hours in the morning and then they come back, like just to be like all in, but with your community. It's really fun.
Yeah. We're like the Tom Brady's of Latin.
Exactly. No, and that's why it's so hard to explain to people from the outside though, because like they just don't get how like the intensity, the celebrity, like all these different things that are like, they kind of have their applications. And like, obviously it sounds like kind of nerdy and ridiculous from the outside, but when you're in it, like you're living it.
Yeah. I mean, it is a bit nerdy and ridiculous, but I think that's part of the love of it.
Definitely.
Anyway, so I kind of wanted to jump back into like the competitive focus because I think that you were mainly a language player, right? When you're playing. So I just wanted to hear like, how did you get into language as a category and how did you go about studying it? Because it's such an expansive category.
Yeah. I think I probably started as more of like an all-around player because you can do that on novice because the scope of what you need to know is so much smaller, and then ended up specializing more and more as I got older and the level of knowledge got so much greater. And I think I really just went to, what I enjoyed and what I was good at, which thankfully for me were the same thing. So I've always and I think like this, I was like this as a teacher too, and even as a classics major, where like I shouldn't even say this, but I didn't really care that much about the Romans. And I don't love mythology the way people love mythology, but I really love Latin, the Latin language. I like all language, but like the intricacy of it, the exceptions to the exceptions, but also like that it's like a contained set, and that even though it's huge, you can kind of like, you can learn it. Like you can know like every word the Romans used. Not that Kurtama players do, but like it's like graspable in a way that a modern language, isn't. That's constantly changing. So I started liking that. I think I was drawn to it right from the beginning, and then I realized like further on, it was kind of my competitive advantage where like I was fast at translating. I was accurate. Like I could do the things in my head quickly and realized that was like where I stood out in a way that, in terms of like the kind of recall for like history and mythology, like it was just like I think I didn't have the inclination, nor would I have stood out as much in those fields. But I ended up in college, like I wrote my senior thesis on the translation of modern Latin, so I got to like write a lot of Latin. So I really was always like very like focused on the details of the language and the nuance of it, rather than like the political climate of ancient Rome, or even literary analysis really doesn't interest me as much as like how to construct a beautiful Ciceronian sentence.
Yeah, I think that appreciation of the language is it's not that common in Kurtamen, but I think that it's really great. I know we've had a guest before who said that like for most of his early years playing Kurtamen, he never studied for Kurtamen, and he only studied reading Latin and like reading all of the different authors in the Latin library, which is very impressive. And I can kind of relate to not liking the civilization as much, because there were definitely problems with, Roman civilization and the implications in Greco-Roman mythology, but just, actually reading the authors and how they constructed sentences could be really beautiful.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you found somebody who studied that way, because I was thinking of like my study methods, and like I think that Kurtamen so often think like one of the knocks on Kurtamen is that it's just memorization, that you're just like imbibing this huge quantity of facts that then you're spitting back out. But I think like the way to like really become a great player is to go deeper than that, and to, as a historian, to like really learn about like the social climate, or like how things, the big shifts, and like how things fit together, not just like who was consul in 496 BC or whatever. Was there even a consul then? Do I even know? But like in the same way, like language, I think really the way, and I remember like senior year, I read the Procalio over the summer, just kind of like as like part of like my like boot camp of like grasping Latin idiom. And I think that was really it, like, you know, it pushes you over the edge of like, yeah, you can conjugate a verb really fast, but you can also like hear a sentence and understand the gist of it.
Yeah, I think that Certamen in general nowadays is going slightly more towards the sort of mastery style of questions, which I really like to see. And I'm sure that we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get further into the interview, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, I guess. So you competed a lot. I'm sure that you've had very tense competitions and, you know, maybe disappointing competitions. So I'm just curious how competition stress affected you and how you kind of combated it.
Yeah, it was, I think Certamen too was like this, like the first time in my life that I really had to deal with like the like performance anxiety and like, you know, really having to like come on at like a really high level and stay there and know that you're going to be really disappointed in yourself if you don't. So this was kind of like a method that I developed through my career, if you want to call it that. But I would do, it's so embarrassing too. It sounds really like hokey and like new agey, but I would write these things that I called Certamen creeds. And I would basically like take a few minutes before the match, like ideally like an hour or 30 minutes before, like long enough for it to set in, and like go off by myself and like find a scrap piece of paper, like a napkin, whatever, and write down the things that I really wanted to remember during the match. And I think mostly it was like slow down, like have fun, like be with your teammates, like you love this game, you've worked so hard, like the kind of, you know, just kind of like mantras really. And it was nowadays, I mean, I feel like that kind of like mindfulness and like, you know, that kind of stuff is all around, but I didn't really know about that kind of stuff from any other venues, but I really found that it helped me center myself, like be in the moment in the match, because I mean, as you guys know, as players, like if you're not like there with the question, like you're gonna lose the milliseconds that you need to be first on the buzzer. So I really found that it helped me like channel my anxiety into like, you know, having fun, which really made me play better when I was like enjoying it and like, what's this question gonna be about? Like, this is so exciting. Like I get to show off everything I've spent so much time learning, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, we might lose. That would be terrible.
Yeah, I think that the mindfulness thing is so important. I remember in one of my very first nationals rounds, I buzzed in on like a 50-50 and I guessed the wrong one. And after that, I was kind of out of the round for the whole time. And after it, one of my teammates kind of came up to me and was like, hey, you did really good. And he just encouraged me, and it was really positive and really, I think it was really helpful to developing a stronger mindset as I went further in my quote unquote career.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really is like, I think that's why it's such an interesting game, because it's not like a 20 question test or a 60 question test, I guess, but it's like there's momentum with it because you see people, like it's such a psychological game too, where like you can get totally rattled by missing a 50-50 and then, you know, never come back on. And in the same way though, like you can see your opponents get rattled when like, for me, like I loved like trying to project a sense of like calm and enjoyment and like, I'm just here having fun and like, you know, as opposed to like, you're all stressed out. So I feel like I kind of like meant, at least, you know, this is all internal, but I felt like I could get an edge on that. But then like when they miss a question, like, you know, hoping that they're going to get rattled as opposed to like, you know, that you're not going to get rattled because you're staying in the moment with the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think you can definitely see that occur in rounds when you see a team streaking, when they're getting just like, you know, they get like a whole quarter and you're like, okay, this team is like really come online now that like they've started like feeling momentum going. And so I wanted to just kind of now go into more like, you know, your experience as a player playing at the national level and maybe like how that was like for y'all, whether it was kind of like hard to bounce back here and there. So your first seemingly maybe not first national convention, we weren't too sure, was 2002.
Yeah, I actually didn't make the Ohio novice team the year before that. I got like beaten on the last question of the tryouts, but yeah, which was like crushing at the time, you know, after 8th grade. But I think like seeing that team play, they ended up losing. They got second. I should say losing. They got second by like 5 points on the last question. It was Ohio had won advanced and intermediate that year, so it was just like, and I really felt like I really wanted to be in that round. Like So yeah, that was my first nationals. But then the next one, yeah, was in 2002 at Kentucky on the intermediate team.
Yeah, so you're the first time I guess you make the team, you go and win, not a big deal or anything, just first time competing and just win. What was that like, especially coming from the frame of like, you barely don't make the team, you like watch the finals and you're like, oh, I really wish I could play this. Like, what was that like, coming into this nationals and then going and winning it? Like, how was that?
I mean, I don't want to sound like horribly cocky here, but it felt like you go and win. And I think some of that was the Ohio team. The advanced team was the same one that had won the year before. So they like were coming in with like, we're defending champions and we're going to repeat. And so like there was definitely this attitude of like in practice that like this is what we do. Like we are not like, oh, I hope we make the finals. Like we are here to win. And then I think like the way it actually like I think the best team at the time, which ended up being like the same Texas team that I faced in 2005 and in the intervening years, they lost in the semifinals on this weird indirect statement thing where I think it's like somewhere in the rules now. It was one of those questions that was like such a controversy that then they had to make a rule about it. But so the best team wasn't, or our biggest rivals weren't in the finals. So the finals really, I think we had it like clinched by like question 13. It really was not, I don't know. It just like it felt like such an anomaly later, but I didn't understand that it was at the time. It just felt like, wow, like I worked all summer. We played against the advanced team and that definitely helped. And then like, we never had any competition. It was great. It was so much fun. So yeah, it was a great high start to my Kurtaman career, which then dipped precipitously after that.
Well, yeah, so you mentioned that you actually practice against the advanced team a bit. And so is Ohio's like national prep actually have a lot of like cross-level interaction
Yeah,
or
definitely. Yeah,
okay.
and I guess that is probably different in Texas, right? From what I've heard, the way that
Yeah,
I mean, you're so
it's
big.
pretty
Yeah.
rare to have like I mean, I think there's movement towards it, but I think it's pretty isolated at least when I was playing to have like cross-level interaction. Like you had to like maybe go to the same school as the older kids
Oh, okay.
and then you would coincidentally just interact with them more. But like I was the one kid from the other school, so I knew almost no one besides my team. But that's really cool to hear. I think that like you have the advanced team practicing against like the intermediate team or maybe intermediate and novice because it really is like okay, these people know where they're buzzing, and it's like this is like a lot of training. So that's actually very neat to hear.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those. I mean, it's a bit of like a small state advantage in a ways. I think like where I know Virginia, like we would have Castra like in the same hallway of the school, but like the teams would be in separate rooms, and there really wouldn't be a lot of like cross team interaction. But Ohio, especially with like those basement practices, like it was like everyone, and we didn't have like teachers that reading questions. It was like, well, somebody's, ideally you have like a younger kid who can read you questions on the advanced team. But yeah, I still remember like that summer I felt like I would like never get questions because I was always playing against the advanced team. And like one time I got like something about like the infinitive of Koopy. It was so exciting because we're playing against like people who were already in the Hall of Fame. So
Yeah, no, that must be a lot of fun. So
it
you
is.
so
Yeah.
after this win, come to 2003 nationals. So it's your first advanced year, and y'all make finals again, and this time you get second. And I was curious, kind of like the transition from like were you playing the same players? Was like how was the round for you as an individual, and I guess just kind of like the tournament as the whole, and like what you maybe think was kind of like the reason why y'all didn't win this time around, maybe like a lack of experience, like yeah.
Yeah. It was funny because you mentioned like your low point in Kurtaman, and this was definitely a low point for me. And I think it wasn't coming in that I expected to win at all, despite like how seemingly easy it had been the year before. But I really felt like we were all sophomores and we were playing against senior teams. Florida had this guy named Brendan Lynn, who was like he's like just a Kurtaman legend. Like he won the decathlon like maybe 4 times, something like one of those just like crazy JCLers. And he had been, of course, like he'd been playing the older Ohio kids for the past few years. So he had gotten second twice in a year. So like everyone knew like he was like out for blood this year. It was his senior year. Like he was really just a dominant player. Like he knew everything. Like he was it wasn't like he was just a language person. Like he also would get first place on the myth test and the history test. Like just, yeah, a great player. I heard a rumor that he like burned all of his JCL notebooks like the week after his last nationals. I don't know if that's true or not. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this podcast. Yeah, so we just like came in as a bunch of sophomores, like really not expecting to do that well, and then like we ended up in finals, and I think that was probably like the best I'd ever played in my life, like maybe in my whole career, that round, where I was just really like on fire with the toss-ups. And I think Brendan might, probably didn't expect it, like wasn't expecting that he would have to be so fast, and it really was like everyone kind of expected it to be a blowout, and then it wasn't. But we were really inexperienced, and we were nervous and kind of like couldn't believe we were in this position. And so we were like there, I remember we were really sloppy on the bonuses. Like I think we got more toss-ups than Florida did, but we would do things like, I remember specifically this one bonus was like respondete latine, quo oculi sunt cerbero. And we like obviously knew the answer. We could translate it, like how many eyes did Cerberus have? Okay, like you can do the math. And we knew we all had to say it because we were like, oh, they said respondete, like we have to all say it at once. So we like counted down, so we said it all at once, and then we answered in English instead of in Latin. So it was just like one of those things where like we were just like throwing away points. And we were down by 5 before the last question, and it was a language question, but it was about like the abbreviation SecNat, which like I still really haven't seen much, although I'm sure like players today know that abbreviation, but I had never heard of this abbreviation, so I missed it. Brendan didn't know it either, but they'd won. Yeah. So that was, I think, just having like the idea that like, oh my gosh, like we might have won, like we were actually really close, and then it was like it didn't happen, was just, it was crushing. It was so disappointing. Yeah. So that was my Certamen low for sure. Yeah, I like really being like a decent showing, but yeah, didn't feel like it.
Yeah, no, throwing Boney away is a very relatable experience when you like you should just know it and then you just say something. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible too, because you're like, I did the hard part, and obviously like the difference between 10 points and 20 points is huge. Like especially when you're playing a good team. So yeah.
So it's interesting because you mentioned that like you were sophomores and it was actually kind of like not something you were super expecting, and especially getting that close. So in 2004, are y'all running the same team? Because I think in 2004 you don't crack semis. Or sorry, no, I guess you get to semis, you don't crack finals.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was wondering like what do you think was maybe the reason? Like what kind of happened from 2003 to 2004?
Yeah, I think a couple things. Well, it was the same team, so we were all sophomores, all 3, or yeah, we were in the same class all 3 years. So same team. I think partly like I kind of lost some interest. My best friend and I did this. She was on the team too, and we did this like canoeing trip in July, which was like a terrible time to leave town for 10 days. I don't know. I think partly for me it had been so disappointing that it was hard to come back with the same kind of fervor. And then I also think like other teams got really good. Like we lost in semis to a really great Virginia team. That was kind of like the beginning of Massachusetts being good. I know it sounds weird nowadays to think of Massachusetts not being good, but they were always like kind of like semis material that never really made it to finals. But they ended up with a great team. And then obviously there was this Texas team, the Andrew Riss Texas team that ended up winning like dominantly. Probably like 240 points in the finals or something. So yeah, there were just a lot of good teams, and I think I just hadn't put in the same kind of effort or enthusiasm that I'd done in the past 2 summers.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see the impact of losses, especially the closer ones. I feel like blowouts are like it's just, we can bounce back from this. We just have to work a lot harder. But when you're really close, that loss of motivation is definitely understandable, because it's like it feels like you did all you could do, and then it's like, did I still need to somehow maybe do more?
Right. And that is like, I mean, Certamen is definitely one of those games where it's like the best team wins, 7 matches out of 10. Or like, if the match were played 10 days in a row, like maybe they would win 8 of them if they're really, really good. But like, there's always going to be things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear, because I was curious when I saw that. I was like, I wonder what may have happened. But I mean, that seems pretty reasonable. But now 2005. So an immortalized finals and
Oh
just
yeah,
nationals. I mean, the Vimeo, like I remember I was like talking to my teacher and I was like, "Oh, I like, are there any recorded rounds?" And she's like, "Actually," and shows me this finals. I'm like, "Yo, what is happening?" And I'm watching Texas end up losing, and I'm like, "No," I'm like blown away because I'm a novice at the time, and I'm like, I cannot believe another state just beat us. But what was that like for you? Because you win this nationals, you're now in the Hall of Fame as well. And like, it's your senior year. This is how you close out. Can you just tell us what that nationals was like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say like the summer leading up to it, it was like my single focus. And I think some of this was like I didn't really want to go to college. Like I was young for my grades, so I was only 17. Like it was just like there was a lot going on. And I think I just poured it all into Latin that summer. So I think also I was kind of embarrassed by like not making finals the year before. And I knew that like this was it. Like I loved Certamen for so many years. And like this was the last Certamen I was ever going to get to play in my life. This was before the World Series existed. So yeah, so we went in and I think we really felt like underdogs again, which was helpful because Andrew's team had just been so dominant the year before and they were back with like almost the same configuration, I think. And you know how like they kind of like swaggered around and I'm friends with Andrew Riss, so this is not meant to be like a slur on him. But they were so like imposing and we really felt like the scrappy underdogs, which I think helps like mentally to like be like, yeah, we're like punching up, like nobody expects us to win. So yeah, we had like we barely made it out of semis due to that we were playing this really good Massachusetts team, and there was just I got accused actually of consultation in the middle of semis because I flipped my ponytail, which I mean you said we're going to talk about gender and Certamen later, so I don't know if that was gender, but somebody in the audience, I don't even know if it was someone related to Massachusetts, but they accused me of sending a signal to my teammate with the ponytail flip. So I was, there was this big like hold up in the middle of the round while they discussed what to do. I was crying. Like it was really just like a very intense and like not very well handled round. But we won on the last question. It was joist. It was which of the following is not derived from Yakio. If you're wondering if you remember Certamen questions 15 years later, like yes, you do. But so then going into finals, like it felt like this was like the match that I'd been like visualizing all summer of like finally like I got to face down Andrew Rist and the Texas team and like here we were. And I mean, yeah, as you said, it's on the website. But yeah, so the lead, I mean, it just kind of like toggled back and forth the whole time. Like they would get a question, we would get a question. Like it went. I think I think both teams were playing well, like playing about as well as we could. And before the last question, we were down by 5, and one of my teammates had been like keeping track, and he knew that it was a history question, which was like not good news for us because I think we'd exclusively gotten language so far, and they had like exclusively gotten like history and myth. So we were like not expecting to get it, and my teammate Steve had he had gotten his wisdom teeth out like the day before nationals, and I feel like this is another sign of the times, but he had like been on so much Vicodin throughout the tournament and was just like he was a good player, but I don't think he'd gotten a single question like through semis. Like he was just like you would look at him and his like pupils would not be focused. So finally though at finals, I think was his first day not on like strong pain medication, so he got a question earlier in the round, and then this last question was it was about Elagabalus, and he like kind of like suddenly from the side, like you see him like twitch and he buzzed in and gets it. And those words like Elagabalus is correct were just like I still remember this like shock of like, disbelief and joy and like, how can this really be happening? Is this actually over? Like it's really, this is it. So it was pretty amazing. It was like still my cousin who was my age ended up being killed in an accident like 3 days after nationals, and I think that combined like having like such a high and then obviously like an indescribable loss after that really made that like feel like it was like just like a culminating moment of like everything was perfect when we won that so it really was like one of the like it still seems unbelievable to me that kind of that like things worked out to that extent. And I think I probably wouldn't have majored in classics or like been a teacher if we had lost that round. Like I know that sounds extreme, but I think that it was just like so much like joy was tied to that moment for me that it made me want to continue in a way that I think if it'd been like another like really devastating disappointment, like I think I would have been ready to like walk away and do something else. So
well, I'm first of all, I would like to offer my condolences. That must be just quite the like, as you mentioned, such an extreme like high, and then like an obviously like an indescribable low just immediately like after. That I just can't imagine what that must have been like. But uh, I wanted to, I guess, maybe like I was curious, like like throughout your years in Kurtamen, we've kind of talked about, and like at least in the competitive side, there's the like you had your low in 2003, 4, 3, 4. Yeah, I'm honestly I'm so bad with the years now. I guess 3 with like being so close, and then like 2004 y'all don't get to crack finals, but you come back, you bounce back, and you end up winning on, as you mentioned. It's like watching that question play through is one of the like as a spectator, I'm like super tense, I'm stressed, I even know what's gonna happen, and I'm still like, when does he buzz, because you just know it's coming.
Yeah.
I was curious, kind of like, like in your JCL career, do you have like, just this kind of like, this is the crowning like moment, like favorite moment, whether it be competitive or not, that you kind of like look fondly back on?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about nationals a lot this summer because of it being virtual, and I was thinking like how disappointed I would have been as a student, like as a teacher, like I could definitely skip nationals, but as a student, it was like just like so much was crammed into that week, like so much like living, like it felt like a month-long week, and it was like the top week of the year by far. So, I mean, it's hard to pick a moment. I would say like those times where you're like playing Mafia with your friends before fellowship, like just trying to kill some time. Or like, I mean, for us, like walking into fellowship the night after we won was like, and people just started clapping, and it was like, oh my gosh, like feeling like what I had done meant something to other people, that like they were proud of Ohio in a way because of what we had done was really cool. But I think it's just like those like moments of like community and feeling like you have all the time in the world, and that there's like so much exciting stuff around every bend and so much to do. It's really an amazing experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think that my fondest memories of the JCL were those little moments that you spent with other people. And I think that ultimately that's what most people who are, done with JCL kind of carry from the experience. But after you were done with the JCL, you were still very active in the Kurtamen scene. You mentioned that you won the very first World Series tournament. And I think to people like me and Nikhil who went to nationals like in the 2010s, World Series was like a mainstay staple of convention, but it didn't even start until 2007, right? So
Right.
Could you talk about like how it began and what it was like competing and being the first champion of it?
Yeah. It was, well, yeah, obviously it was Chris Sloan's idea. And then I think Tom Reed, who was the Kurtamen chair at the time, was very behind it. I thought, honestly, when I heard about it, I thought it was a terrible idea. I thought Kurtamen needed to end with high school. I thought it was going to lead to this like whole like extra culture of like washed up Kurtamen stars, like just trying to like keep the glory going. Like, and I thought it would take away too from like the high school tournament, which like really should have been the point. So I didn't even know if I wanted to play when I first heard about it. But then I think like the way it's been executed, I think it's definitely gotten better over the years. The first year, like the rounds happened after competitive Kurtamen. So in some ways, I think it really kind of did take away from competitive Kurtamen, where it was like novice, intermediate, advanced, and then World Series, like the most exciting. And so, I think they've definitely like having it on the last night as like an alternative activity to the dance, and having so much student involvement has been really good for it. But now I forget where I was going with that. So the first time, I guess it was like, it kind of felt to me like, wow, I get to play again. But having so many like silly questions, or questions that like you could never get away with in competitive Kurtamen, like I think that helped to make it feel like, okay, this is really just for fun.
Yeah, talking about washed up players trying to regain the glory, really I think it struck a chord in me and Nikhil.
It's hard. I mean, Kurtamen is like the one thing that like you can be really good at in high school, and then it stops. Like there's just like nowhere to go. And I feel like even quiz team, like there's college quiz team, and like obviously like if you pour all your time into playing the violin, like you're gonna keep. So I think it's really tough with Kurtamen having like such a hard stop to it. So there's a lot of us, a lot of has-beens grasping at shreds of what used to be.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that like you didn't particularly like the idea at first, and now, you know, like there's World Series still, and there's Boston Elite and Premier Kurtamen League, which are tournaments meant for adults and SCLers. And I was wondering if you still had the same kind of opinion on these sorts of tournaments, or whether it's changed at all since then.
Yeah, I forgot about the existence of those the elite ones. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like to me, they aren't appealing at all, like in this stage of life. Like, I mean, even as a coach, like I think the last time I coached was 3 years ago before I had kids, but I love playing, like still, like I love like playing my teams. It's really fun. But I don't know. I just feel like for me, I'm done competing. But I also recognize that like I had a really great like end to my career. And I think sometimes like, you know, that like I feel like for me it was very easy to like tie a bow on it and just be like, that was awesome, like now I'm done and ready to move on. And like maybe if like you came like so close to winning and now you want to again, like maybe that would make it more appealing. I don't know. I worry that that sounds insulting to people who are who are into that. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's great that people can have fun doing that. I hope that nobody's spending too much time studying for it, but if they are, you know, whatever, that's fun.
Yeah, I think that that's a totally fair opinion. You know, Kurtamen is mainly a high school event, so maybe adults spending hours and hours studying for it isn't the greatest idea. But
I mean, I wouldn't want to offend anyone who want to.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's fun, but like, yeah, I get what you mean about like placing focus on the JCLers. But I mean, even after you stopped playing World Series, I know that you were really involved in writing and organizing it, so much so that I think last year when you weren't writing, there were a couple questions about how you weren't there and how more people had to write questions now. So yeah, I was wondering like, how did you, like when you were writing, try to make World Series different from regular Kurtamen and fun for the people who were playing it?
Yeah, well, this is all thanks to Ken Andino, who I worked with at Flint Hill. And then, so he was kind of the person to like rope me into it. And I'm sure he was the person to insult me in the questions. It has actually happened, which I don't put it past him in the least. But I think Ken and I had a similar philosophy about writing it, which was like, yeah, like we want the players to have fun, but really it's about the audience in World Series, as opposed to regular Kurtamen, which like can be completely impenetrable to the audience and nobody cares. But we really tried to like avoid anything that the audience would get bored by. And I think having like such a great crowd of JCLers there, like people who know about Kurtamen, like often like the Kurtamen stars of the week are there watching World Series, but making it funny, like putting in some embarrassing things, like they're there to like watch their teachers like get embarrassed or, you know, have to like act out some horrible command. So we really like tried to do that as much as possible. So I think, and maybe that's like where like a little bit of my like, I don't want to play Kurtamen anymore is from. It's like, I really feel like World Series, like when I see people taking it really seriously and like there to win, like I'm kind of like, that's just not the point of this event. Like the point of this event is to have a hilarious tournament for the crowd. So like, you know, the questions might be unfair or like you might not like, you know, but it's not competitive for Kurtamen. We're not going to have like a 20-page rule book for this.
Well, I think that you've done a really good, well, like in the past, you've done a really good job with it. You know, watching World Series is always one of my favorite parts of convention. There were just so many things that were fun about it. Like you said, watching teachers embarrass themselves, acting out dramatic interpretation. I like the really arbitrary, like point distribution scorings. Like it was really fun seeing people being awarded 0.1 points. I know like even in some rounds, the audience was allowed to play in if the teams that were playing didn't get the question. So yeah, I think that was a really fun experience.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. It was, I mean, nationals as an adult is like a completely different experience than as a kid. But I would say like the best part about nationals as an adult for me has been like getting to be a moderator for it. Definitely more fun to be a moderator than a player. Like definitely.
Yeah, so also kind of concurrent with your World Series career, you were coaching. So you said in college you coached Ohio, right?
Hmm.
So what was that experience like? Like, what was the transition from being a really good player to a coach? And like, what did you do as a coach, I guess?
Well, I should preface this by I am not a good coach. Like, I mean, maybe I'm just, I was a really good player, but I'm not a really good coach. And I don't know if some of that is like my like philosophy as to like I just have a hard time like giving study plans to players or like telling them like you need to work on that. Like I like to facilitate a player's ability to like grow for him or herself within the context of Kurtamen. So I think that that really like when I see like some of these really great like players turned coaches, um I'm sure you guys like there's so many of them, but I think, and I don't know if it was the way I was coached or kind of like not coached, and like it was very independent for me and for my teammates, my Ohio teammates, but I feel like I kind of bring the philosophy of like I will read you questions, I'll play against you, I'll give you suggestions, but like I'm not gonna like sit here and quiz you or tell you exactly what to learn. But,
Yeah, I think that we've heard that kind of philosophy before. Like, we've heard that Ohio players are generally more independent, and that like it's more player-player interaction for mentoring instead of like coach-player. And I'm wondering how that sort of changed when you graduated college in 2008 and started teaching in 2009, and you began to coach Virginia. Is there like a significant difference in the way that Kurtamen coaching is done in Ohio and Virginia? And like, would you say, if there is, that you prefer one of them?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, as far as I know, I think Ohio is what I would say like most states were like 15 or 20 years ago, where the teachers like they unlock the classrooms, they give you materials, they'll read you questions, but it's not, the players are like almost they're coaching themselves and you're coaching your team. And nowadays, I think the states that are successful, like I think you see it in Massachusetts, Texas, Florida, like there's I think the coaches are like just providing like so much more than that. Yeah. And I think Virginia is definitely like more towards that model of like even like the fact that like every level has their own coach. Like that is, I don't know if that's ever been a thing in Ohio. It certainly wasn't when I was there, where there was like kind of like Mr. Dean was the Kurtamen guy and all the teams were under him. But
Yeah.
he yeah
I
he
mean,
was more of a, I would say like a facilitator than a coach.
yeah.
But I
And
think some of that is like former players becoming coaches. Like I don't include myself in this because I don't think that's I excel in it in any way. But that they're like really pouring a lot into their teams and like passing on so much expertise and almost like having like similar investment as their team, which I think is really, really admirable in a coach.
yeah, Mr. Dean does bring on some people from time to time, but yeah, I think that it was always most helpful learning from other people who were like who you could relate to in playing and kind of see your progression like go on with them. And I think that that's like a good philosophy to coaching. I'm also curious how you approached coaching differently once you stopped being like a college student and started being a teacher. And like I assume that you had more teaching experience, more like knowledge about how to work with kids and JCLers. So I was wondering if that changed your coaching style at all.
Yeah, I think it was probably more for me moving states changed it. Because in Ohio, as a college student, like, I mean, I talked about the basement practices, like, I was just there at the basement practices. So in Virginia, then as a coach, like we had our Costra at Flint Hill, we all had our separate classrooms. Like, there was definitely like the expectation too from the other coaches and the other teachers was much more of like, I should be guiding this in a stricter way. But I was usually like a co-coach, so which I much preferred. So I don't know. And it's funny, like I feel like you can tell my investment as a coach because I don't think I could tell you like how my team's placed. So I know that none of them ever won, which I think I would remember that. But for me it was like I really wanted the kids to have like that independent sense. But I mean, I think nowadays the way Kurtamen is, I think you need like more coaching and steady coaching to be able to build a dynasty or to have a state that's like good year after year and not just good when you get like that flash player.
Yeah, coaching is an interesting phenomenon to discuss in terms of, the influence of like a coach and their involvement on a player. And there's so many factors to determine like how a team ends up winning, honestly. Like there's so many things there. And so I guess kind of like you mentioned you stopped coaching in I think 2018, I want to say, or maybe
Yeah.
2017.
Or yeah. 2018 was the last time I went to nationals. Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, from then, like kind of like where are you now as like a person in your life? Like just kind of like how are you, in your like current state, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm not teaching Latin right now for the first time, and I think I taught for 5 years this latest stretch. So I quit teaching Latin. I've had 2 babies in the past 2 years, so things have really changed rapidly for me. I'm also a writer. I have 4 books published, so I'm like kind of probably pushing more to like continue that part of my career rather than teaching. Like that's my plan for now, but I don't know. I've tried to quit Latin several times and I always end up getting sucked back in. So we'll see.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's really cool, and especially like you're like, yeah, 4 books published, not a big deal or anything. Not like publishing books is like, how did you kind of just end up writing? I guess I was curious, like how that just like was it kind of like a bit spontaneous? Was it a thing you've been kind of working on like the whole time? Like how did that come about?
It was always something that interested me, but I mean, like I really wanted to be a writer. Reading is like my favorite thing to do, but I never really had the time to get started in college, or then especially when I was teaching full time out of college. Like that was very overwhelming. So I actually decided to start teaching part-time. I moved to Cincinnati where you can actually like support yourself on a part-time teaching schedule, not the case in DC. And I just kind of like was like, I'm going to teach 60% of the time and I'm going to write 40%. So I wrote my first book that first year teaching. It was actually called Varsity Latin. It was about a Certamen team. And it was like 20 chapters that were like structured around the final round. Like it was like deep Latin. And I did find my agent with that, but we never managed to sell it for reasons that I'm sure you can imagine. All the editors were like, this book is not marketable. Like nobody wants to read about a Latin competition, which like I still kind of wonder. It was my first book, so it was not a great attempt. But then I ended up writing my second book was my first one published, and then I've been writing ever since. So working part-time is definitely helpful for having a writing career. Like I haven't really written much in the past couple of years as I've been working full-time and now having 2 kids.
I just wanted to jump in and mention, I've seen your brother reading the draft for Varsity Latin, I'm pretty sure, and he was telling me about it. And I was like, whoa, that sounds so cool. I can't wait to see it published so I can read it.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I gave it to Peter for his Kindle as like a birthday present. And I think he knows it better than I do at this point. He really got into it for a while.
No, I mean that's super neat, and yeah, I mean it's always tough with especially like super niche audiences. Like, how do you work with it? But that sounds like an interesting thing. So I may have to ask you more about this later because I do want to hear kind of like what that was like because that sounds like a neat story to hear. So you mentioned like you haven't really like so your last nationals was 2018. But have you been involved in the JCL still since then, or is it kind of like you're now kind of like separated from it?
Yeah. So I taught another year of Latin after that. And then, since then though, I guess as I taught part-time last year, but not Latin, but I still I write questions for tournaments. I'm on the Medusa mythology exam committee.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of, I like to like keep my hand in it in some way, even though I was Virginia State Certamen chair, but then resigned that too. And I mean, this is all just like baby related. Like I just, to me, like you can't have babies and do intense Certamen. I know some people manage to, but yeah, no, I think it's like, and in my last hiatus from teaching too, when I was in my mid-20s, I always kept writing questions because I think in part there's like a need for it for people with expertise to contribute because these tournaments, I mean, as I learned when I was the Virginia chair, are a beast to run. You have hundreds of questions to write and edit and compile and then, and get out. And if there's mistakes in 1 out of 500, people will let you know. Yeah. So it is like, I really try to keep contributing on that end of things because people who do that are really providing such a good service to so many students.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm glad to hear that because I think, question writing is a really big community-based thing, especially in Latin. Because like unlike Quizable, where there's like there's literally an organization that is like mass producing this. Like Kurtamen's pretty much just community based in terms of how to get questions out. So that's really cool to hear. So I wanted to now kind of, go into more just a general, like kind of looking back on your experience in, the JCL as a player, as, a coach and question writer, and specifically, I guess, in regard to your gender. And I was curious how that experience was for you. You mentioned like the ponytail incident with the consultation. And I was curious, like, do you think your experience do you think your experience was affected by your gender, and like how just that was for you?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and definitely one I've spent talking a lot about with my best friend, who is also female. And we were like, we talked a lot about it, I think, because we felt so conspicuous, because I think at the time, I know Kurtamen is like overwhelmingly male right now, but it was even more so, I think, back then, where every time we were in a finals, we were the only two girls on the stage. The moderators were mostly men. It really was like very male dominated in a way that, like, we noticed, which I think, like, back then, honestly, like, I don't know if I could have told you what feminism was. Like, all that stuff kind of went over my head, and wasn't talked about in popular culture as much either. But yeah, and it's funny, like, when I think about the way the discourse was back then, it was like, well, girls just aren't aggressive enough, or like, it's because boys play video games. Girls just don't have the kind of like buzzer quickness that boys have. And like, I think we just kind of like accepted that, which sounds weird now to say, but that, like, that was just the narrative that was given to us. And I definitely like felt it when I was playing people. I think part of like my like strategy of like exuding like calm and like having fun was almost like to play on it a little bit, and to be like, well, I'm not like a nerdy, stressed out boy. I'm like, I'm having fun over here, and hopefully that rattles them. So, but I don't think I really reflected on it until like much later as the teacher. And I think as a teacher, you really see, like, it's not that there's like a talent differential between boys and girls, but it is the fact that, like, in any kind of like speed-based high school competition, whether it's Quiz Bowl or Kurtamen or math leagues, things like that, like, boys are just like represented in a way that girls aren't. And I think that as teachers, it's really incumbent upon us to, when you're like scouting out the kids in your 8th grade class that you think would be a good Kurtamen player, like, don't default to your idea of a Kurtamen player, and when if you play classroom Kurtamen, which I know a lot of teachers do to get kids interested, like, yeah, there's probably going to be boys who have been socialized since, nursery school to be aggressive and fast and to jump on in all of the questions. That doesn't mean that they're going to be your great players. So I think that, like, in terms of like recruiting and looking out for like the quiet girls who have been, told to be quiet and nice and not be aggressive, like, in so many ways all their lives, like, they can be great players too. So I think teachers really need to look out for that, and to watch out for all of our own implicit biases, whether we're men or women, about who's gonna be the next star.
Yeah, no, I mean that's interesting. You mentioned the aggression thing. I think Alan and I have kind of discussed this on the side because this is like genuinely, like, this is a topic that needs to be talked about more, and is, I think, gaining a little bit more prominence with Jenny Luongo coming in as the Kurtamen chair and trying to make a bit more moves. But as you've noted, there's just this absurd like just gender disparity that is going on, and the aggression thing's interesting because like I don't know, it's just such an odd like characteristic, like, oh, because this isn't something that like maybe women do or like they're not super aggressive or something, which first of all is like, okay, where are we getting these ideas from and where are they rooted in? It's interesting to hear, like, that was kind of like something you yourself maybe not like consciously were like kind of like thinking or approaching, but there was just that kind of like calm you were explaining both earlier and just now is like, it's really cool to hear that you were just kind of like, I am like my own person type thing. It wasn't like I'm going to become like, yeah, I don't know, become more boy like to play Kurtamen and whatever that means.
Yeah, but I mean, you do have to take on like, and by like qualities that are like stereotypically male, I mean like things that are like admired in men or boys and not admired in girls, but you have to be like, you have to jump on questions. You have to get stuff wrong. You have to be willing to like put yourself out there in a way that like boys are praised for doing from early on and girls are not. So it's like, you have to like take on these qualities that are like, that are, you know, it's like how the thing that like ambition in a man is like the, you know, considered a positive quality, but ambition in a woman is considered negative. It's like in girls too, playing Kurtamen, like you have to be like a little cutthroat and, you know, willing to like jump in on a question that you think your teammate might know, but like you're going to be faster and you might get it wrong and your teammate's going to be mad at you. Like you have to deal with all that stuff to be a great player.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to think that like gender, like it shouldn't, but it seems to just influence like how it's approached. Because as you were saying, you know, the whole ambition thing is a big like, there are certain emotions that are like that are praised in men that are not praised in women, and it's just so arbitrary. It's like, this is so dumb. Like, why are we here? And you mentioned the teacher thing, and I wanted to talk about that a bit because I was talking to Emily Lewis on this like at a different point in time, and she mentioned that Virginia kind of has a thing where they try to have like one male, one female coach. At least
I didn't
like
know about that.
okay, so at least she did it with her system. I don't know if maybe that's moved to the state level. But that was interesting because she was mentioning, you know, like there has to be someone there to support the girls, and I don't think a guy can do the job. Like I think like you need to have like a woman there to be like, you know, there's someone to identify with. You don't have like this kind of like island experience. And I was curious, like, what are your thoughts on like stuff like that? Like, do you think there should be, not obviously, like, you know, there shouldn't be some arbitrary gender disparity in coaching. Like it should really hit a 50-50 point. But what do you think about this like dual coaching system where you have like a guy and a girl both coaching a team to kind of offer, you know, I mean, in the binary spectrum, at least both sides of the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think men can be great coaches for girls, or male teachers can be great coaches for girls. I do think it's important to make sure that girl players see women in positions of leadership, like Jenny Longo, to see women moderators, to see former players who are girls. Like, you know, there's so much that that it is like important to be able to like, you know, you have to see it to be it in some ways. Like maybe not always, but I think often seeing like, oh yeah, like this isn't just like a boys club. Like this is something I can be a part of too. And I think like, I mean, I was so happy when Jenny ran for Kurtamen chair, because it's like the fact that there has never been a woman in that position, despite the fact that like Latin teachers are mostly female. Like obviously that's, I figured that she would, you know, have an eye to some of those problems, but it is like, when you, maybe not questions hopefully being written today, but like I remember buzzing in once when it was like change the phrase, or you know, put in the dative singular the phrase femina, and like I buzzed in like accidentally there, but I guessed femini pulchri and got it right, because like women are beautiful and men are strong. Like, you know, it's just that kind of bias in questions where like you're not even seeing in the questions like the kind of like gender representation that we're looking for. And I think like the fact that we're like going up against Roman society, where like obviously like it was a deep rooted patriarchy, you know, we really have to be aware of this, that if everyone that you're asking questions about is a man, like hopefully maybe there's a woman reading the questions to you.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I had never actually thought about before. Like, I mean, I think one of the things that Jenny Longo is moving towards, hopefully I'm not misquoting her, and if I do, I don't want people to now attack her on accident or something. But like, it was kind of, you know, there's a lot of women in literally like history and mythology and literature and just literally everything, but there's not getting asked about. And
Right.
it's like, you know, trying to move towards like, you know, you shouldn't have like a weird like gendered answer lines where it's like, oh, okay, like I'm this we're not going to ask about any women because they're not there, even though they like definitely are. And it's really not that hard if you just think for like 0.2 seconds. And it's interesting that you mentioned the bias that exists in questions. Like I don't think I ever like actively even thought about that, and it's probably some deep-seated bias, you know, from just like how we are raised, and you know, there's these arbitrary conventions we have for genders and what we ascribe to them quality-wise, and that is just
Do you know about the Bechdel test, which is like, it's for films, but it's like basically a test is for a film is like, do women characters speak to each other, not about a man? Like, do they ever appear on screen together? And if they're talking together, are they talking about a man, or are they talking about like, like the many other things going on in their lives that aren't men? And I feel like that you can apply that to Kurtamen so well, of like, and once you start seeing it through that filter, I mean, like read through a current round or read through a round from 2010, think like, okay, what's going on in this passage? Are there any women in this passage? Are the women like just the wife of so-and-so, or are they like people in their own rights? Who are the sentences? Like all these things that like, yeah, like only men ruled Rome, but like we have so many, as you're saying, Jenny's talking about, there's so many options of things to talk about in mythology and history, and then especially in language. Like we don't have to write sentences about like a Miles, you can write sentences about an Ancilla. Like there's just, that's where I feel like the field is just open for that. So
yeah, no, and yeah, and kind of like, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's weird to think about, because I like, until like the movement more recently, I don't think I ever actively thought about it, because maybe it's just being a guy, I didn't really think about it very much, because it didn't stand out to me, because it wasn't like something that I guess I identified with. And I mean, now it's a lot more clear once I started like thinking and looking at things a bit more closely, and I'm like, wait a second, what is happening here?
definitely. Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of now just talk about more the competitive side of Kurtamen, I guess, and I guess in more of the technical side of Kurtamen. Like, what do you think of the current scene? I guess, or at least like when you departed in terms of involvement, maybe, but you're still writing questions. Like, what do you think of like about how it is now compared to how it used to be?
I would say it's so much more intense. Like players are so much better than they used to be. I mean, maybe like the top player from back then could compete with like the top 10 players now, but the depth is so much greater. I mean, I definitely remember like in 2004, as we talked about, like it was embarrassing not to make finals for me. And nowadays, I feel like making finals is like a huge achievement, because there's 8 teams that could win the whole thing on every level, and that like totally deserve to win the whole thing. And it's really like astounding to watch, especially I think advanced, the level and the depth of the players. And I think some of that's due to like the differences in coaching that we were talking about. And then the internet, I think like having Connor Harrison's history packet available to anyone with an internet connection is different from how it used to be, where like maybe like your Latin teacher had a photocopied packet that they could give to you, but like the resources just weren't spread with the same speed and area that they are now.
Yeah, yeah. And I was wondering, are there any like specific things that you still see now that you would like to, that you'd like to have like changed from like where it is like now, I guess, that it could keep improving?
Yeah, I think Kurtamen's had this problem for a long time, where it's great for like the top 10% of players, and it's okay if you're like not that great. But if you're like really just coming in to like see what it's like, or to have some fun with your friends, like it can be really demoralizing to play a team that's, like at a local tournament gonna like totally wipe you out. And I know as a teacher, it's as moderating local tournaments or state tournaments, where you're reading, and like it's one of those rounds where one team is like actually getting every question, and the other teams like basically aren't even paying attention. They aren't even holding their buzzers anymore, because like what's the point when you're playing against like the LeBron Jameses of the Kurtamen world? I think that's like an issue. I know in Virginia, when I was Kurtamen chair, we started this system of doing, which like I won't, not taking credit for coming up with this. This was like a bunch of teachers talking, but we did a competitive bracket and an amateur bracket in each division, and teams just self-seeded. And we said like, if you've won before, if you played before, try competitive. If you're just trying it out, try amateur. Or we called it open, I think. But that ended up being really successful, even with the self-seeding, which I wasn't really expecting. But just allowing kids who want to come and have fun with it, which is great. Like they're spending their Saturdays doing Latin. That's awesome. Like they actually could have fun because they were playing against people who were also there to have fun. And people who are there to have fun and win would then be able to, also have better competition, because, it's not that much fun to be on the dealing end of a blowout either, where it's just like, it's kind of embarrassing for, I don't know, it's just as a high schooler when like everything's embarrassing anyways, like Yeah, not great. So we tried that. I mean, it would be interesting to see other takes on like how to make Kurtamen, like, because I just feel like it's a game that offers so much to like a wide range of students and a wide range of like attitudes towards it, where it obviously, like what we've been talking about this whole time, it gives a lot to kids who want to put a ton of time into it and who are really talented at it. But it also is like it. I mean, I've seen like students who are no good at Kurtamen but really like it. They end up being Latin teachers, and they're like, it's like they bring a totally different set of skills to the table than people who can conjugate a verb in 3 seconds. So I would love to see nationals Kurtamen too kind of start to explore some of these ways that like Kentucky can field a team and have fun and enjoy it and learn something in a way, the same way that that Virginia can.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, there's an unfortunate lack of interest in trying to write like quote like easier questions. I mean, there's some movement towards, like easier answer lines. So it's like we're now not completely barring you from answering a question just because you just didn't know this one random person existed that whose significance is very questionable in the grand scheme. But like, you're completely barred, as opposed to, if you toss up Apollo and you have some hard lead in, and maybe at the end you're like, the god of healing plays the lyre, or whatever, like stock, quote unquote, stock clue you want to put in. There's like, it still rewards you for knowing this, like, the basics about Apollo, and that's like good. Like you show that you know stuff about him. And I think it's like, I think that maybe a nature of Kurtamen's hyper competitiveness, where there's only a desire to write hard questions and be like, oh, can you flex your knowledge for us and like prove that you know this obscure thing.
Definitely. And like, as someone who, like, I ran the kickoff in the state finals for Virginia a couple years, so I was soliciting questions from people, and I know it was just like, it's really hard as a question writer not to like write questions that like maybe you always wanted to hear in a tournament and you never did, but like you're like the top player from your year writing these questions. So I always was toning down difficulty. I think but it is like, especially as a teacher, there's like nothing worse than writing a Kurtamen round and reading it to a group of kids and having like 10 points be scored, which happens, like 3 teams in a room, and 10, 20 points are scored. So I think like making it accessible, but also like not losing the joy of it for the elite players. And I think that they get so much out of it, and it's like one of few outlets, I think, for that like certain kind of kid. And I would hate to, like, you don't want every question to be like, who was the king of the gods, and whoever buzzes fastest on king gets it. So it's got to like maintain the challenge, but also have a broader range of accessibility.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And that's something I definitely was guilty of when writing questions in the past, where I was doing the classic, okay, what's this very cool thing? And then it's like, no one knows this. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's fair.
That's how everyone starts writing questions.
It's been a process. But so kind of like with that, I was curious if you have any like last advice or words, as like a former player and coach, or, teacher, like that you would kind of like to share that you wish you had heard, going into it.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's like, when you're in a certain phase of Kurtamen, it seems like it's only like offering you one thing, but I think it's good to remember that it like it hits so many aspects, whether it's like the intellectual pursuit or the social aspect, or the like helping others aspect. That, I don't know, it's a nebulously stated thing. I just feel like Kurtamen, like, as I said, like can be so many things to so many people. And as people working to keep the game alive, like as you guys are with your podcast, as teachers are, question writers are, like, to keep that in mind and remember that like there's just so many different angles to it and different ways that people can find enjoyment and learn and grow with their community too.
No, I think a big thing that people always seem to forget is just like enjoying it. It's a fun event and you're with your friends. I mean, like, what more can you ask for,
Right,
especially the Saturdays
with your friends. Yeah.
Like, it's a lot of fun.
And it's definitely something that there's just like nothing like it as an adult or as a college student, really. So Yeah, enjoy it while it lasts. Maybe that's like my dark my dark reminder to current students, like you don't get to do this for long. So
Yeah, I mean, but you can always be involved otherwise, right? Even
yeah,
post like writing questions and modding, I think is very like fun. You know, you get to watch like kids get questions, and you can
mhm,
see as they're like putting together what the bonus is. I think, yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. Uh,
definitely.
yeah, so with that, thanks so much for coming on. It was a
Oh,
blast to hear your thoughts and your opinions and your story. It was like, you know, we kind of get to hear like the general idea, but then when we hear all the details and it comes together, it's like really exciting, and it's like, oh, this is like, did not know this at all, and this it's really neat. It's really neat.
oh, well, thanks so much for having me. It's fun to remember some of those those good times. So it was great to talk to you guys. I'm really excited about this podcast too. I think it's a really cool thing that you're doing for the community. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're glad you feel that way because that's what we want. We want people to, you know, like be excited to hear various people's stories, whether they do or do not know them, and how much do they really know about them. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely like good way to build some like institutional knowledge too among, just like learning some of the history of the game and how it's changed. It's really neat. So I'm excited to listen to more of it.
Yeah. With that, take care.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.